So this is the January 14th meeting of the Planning Policy Commission. Welcome to all of you in this new year. Due to the governor's proclamation on 2028 related to the COVID-19 emergency and open public meetings, this meeting is being held remotely. The commissioners know that if they want to make a comment or ask a question, to put their question or comment in the chat. As normal, we will have public comments at the end of this meeting. If anybody is out there that would like to make a public comment, please follow the directions on the website. Hit #3 to tell us that you want to make a comment. Kristen will call the last two letters of your, the numbers of your phone call when you are ready to speak. Hit #6 so that we can hear you, and you will have a limit of 5 minutes to make your conversation. The first thing on our agenda is a roll call. So if Kristen would take the roll call.
Okay, just unmute and say here when I call your name, please. Commissioner Monahan.
Here.
Commissioner Milligan.
Here.
Commissioner Zaragoza.
Here.
Commissioner Lewis.
Here.
Commissioner Carl.
Here.
Commissioner Boyce.
Here.
Commissioner Fall.
Here.
And Commissioner Probola.
Here.
Here.
Before we start, I want to make sure that everybody realizes that my name is not Joan Nee. Somehow we have not been able to put my full name on there, so I will introduce myself as Joan Probola, and I'm serving as chair for this evening's meeting. Even though we are not voting on anything tonight, it's nice to see that we are in full attendance this evening. It's nice to have everybody here, but especially the 3 new members that we have on our commission this evening. And as normal, what we usually do is have each of you just say who you are, how long you've been in the city, and maybe a 3-second blurb on why you want to be on planning policy or what you hope to learn or do while you're here. So we're going to start with Matt. If Commissioner Monahan would like to take the microphone and introduce himself, that would be great.
Yes, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. My name is Matt Monahan. I live in the Issaquah Highlands. We've been here for about 1.5 years. And in my previous life in Washington, D.C., I was a litigator and litigated a land use case that was a lot of fun, and figured that I'd want to see how the sausage was made on the inside. So that's one of the main reasons I'm here. So I'm really looking forward to working with all of you in the coming years. So thank you.
Welcome. Commissioner Milligan.
Thank you, Chair Probola. My name is Nina Milligan, and thank you for welcoming me and us to the commission. I've lived in Issaquah for about 15 years in Issaquah Highlands. I served on the Urban Village Development Commission for 8 years as one of my first volunteers. I'm sorry about this. Hang on. Can you still hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Having served on a commission that approves land use applications, I've always wanted to work more with the policy that created them, created the standards, and brought forth those issues for developers to work with. So I'm really glad to be here on the Planning Policy Commission. Thank you.
And our final person, hopefully I will say your name correctly, Commissioner Zaragoza.
You got it. Richard Zaragoza. Yeah. I'm super happy to be here. This is this is actually going to be a lot of fun, I think. So I've been in Issaquah for 15 years, my wife and 2 kids. We've lived in Issaquah Highlands for about a decade, and most recently in May Valley, and now downtown Issaquah. So we've been all over the place, and we really love it here. And this is my chance to learn a little bit more about how the city functions and get to understand the details of how we all live together.
Thank you. And again, welcome to all of you. So I know that we're all excited to have more ideas that to look at what we have to work on. Our purpose is to take what the city gives us and tear it apart and make sure that there's nothing that they've forgotten. And to have more eyes put on this is always a good idea. Tonight, Kristen, is there anybody from the city or staff that is joining us tonight?
Yes, I'm Kristen Leeson, Senior Planner with Community Planning and Development. We also have Andrea Snyder, who is our Deputy City Administrator and Interim Community Planning and Development Director, and Megan Curtis Murphy, she's with the Office of Sustainability and will be giving our presentation tonight.
Which leads us right into our presentation for this evening, which is a discussion on the proposed amendments to the electric vehicle charging station. So I'm assuming that all of you have been able to join in and hear part of Megan's presentation to the city session, whatever they call it.
Excuse me, Joan, I'm going to interrupt for one moment, please. Commissioner Boyce just made a good point. We still need to approve the minutes from the last meeting before moving on to the presentation.
Oh, excuse me. Wow. Since we do this every time, I'm really surprised, and I've been looking at the agenda. So I need an approval of the minutes from the December 10th, 2020 meeting. Is there any additions, discussion on the proposed minutes? Hearing none, according to city directions, the minutes are approved. So now we will ask Megan Curtis Murphy to give us a presentation on the proposed amendments to our electric vehicle charging stations.
Thank you. Just taking a minute to set up my screen there. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Great. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the new commissioners, and nice to see the current commissioners as well. So my name is Megan Curtis Murphy, and I am the Senior Sustainability Coordinator for the city. So tonight I'll be presenting about the proposed electric vehicle or EV ordinance. This ordinance would require EV charging infrastructure in new multifamily and commercial buildings, as well as substantial retrofits. And if passed, the new code language would reside in Title 18 under 1809 parking standards. And I'm going to pause for a minute because I'm hearing a little feedback from myself. Is anyone else hearing that? Okay, just one moment. It may have been fixed for that. So the city council has requests. No, it was not. Sorry. 1 minute. I'll try taking off my headphones. Okay, can you hear me now? All right. Sorry, we did the audio check beforehand, but there was a change since then. So the city council had requested a draft ordinance to come before them at a January meeting, which we did at the study session this past Tuesday. And council members then explicitly said they wanted input on the proposal from the Planning Policy Commission, as well as the newly formed Environmental Board later this month. This evening, we're looking for direction from the commissioners on the overall proposal, which will increase the infrastructure needed to support electric vehicles in the city. Specifically, there's a couple components of the ordinance that came up at the council meeting that we want to get some further feedback on. So first is the use of incentives to encourage electric vehicle readiness in single-family homes and townhomes. And second is the use of a waiver for affordable housing units so as not to add cost to these projects. And also third is whether transit-oriented development or TOD projects should be handled differently in the ordinance due to their proximity to transit. There are several reasons why this is an optimal time to implement an EV charging infrastructure ordinance. Back in 2014, Issaquah adopted GHG emission reduction targets, and transportation makes up 38% of our community-wide emissions. So by increasing EV ridership, this will help the city move closer to our climate goals. The Sustainable Building Action Strategy is another city plan that supports the ordinance. This was adopted by council in 2017 and includes a strategy to prioritize clean and shared mobility design elements by updating codes for electric vehicles. We also have the city's mobility master plan, which includes a policy to help increase use of electric vehicles with these new standards will help to do. And lastly, increasing EV infrastructure was identified as a priority at the community convening on climate, which we hosted last July. And together with the local organizations who are co-hosting that, we presented the recommendations from the convening at an October 19th council meeting, and council members then requested a proposal to come before them in January. Another reason why an EV ordinance is especially important for Issaquah now is that King County is expected to experience rapid growth in EV ownership over the coming years. And one reason for this is that Washington State passed a law in 2020 that will require automakers to sell a certain percentage of zero-emission vehicles each year. A similar law is already on the books in California, which has the largest market share percentage of EVs in the country. And in addition, electric vehicles are expected to achieve price parity with gas vehicles as soon as 2023, and are also cheaper to own and maintain than gas vehicles. However, one factor that might inhibit this growth is lack of access to EV charging infrastructure, which this ordinance helps to address. The people most affected are those living in multifamily housing, which unfairly deters them from the benefits of EV ownership, since most EV charging happens at home. And this is why a policy requiring electric vehicle charging infrastructure in apartment buildings is particularly needed to increase EV ownership. And, I'm hearing a little bit of feedback. Councilmember or Commissioner Probola, were you able to go on mute?
To what?
To go on mute. I think that might be what the feedback is from. Okay. All right, great. Thank you. So before we get into the details of the proposal, I want to clarify some of the lingo around the various types of EV infrastructure. So this ordinance is looking at level 2 charging, which is the most common because it allows cars to charge faster. So it requires the 240 volt circuit, and this is like the bigger outlet that is commonly used for dryers in a household. So you can charge using. You can also charge using a common 110 volt plug point, but this takes much longer, so it's not really considered adequate for common electric vehicle usage. So the first type of EV charging is EV capable. This means that there's electrical panel capacity and space to support level 2 charging, but no outlet installed. The second type of EV infrastructure is EV ready. So this is a designated parking spot that's provided with one 240 volt dedicated circuit for the charging station. So this includes the plug point for the charger, but not the charging equipment itself. So in a house, someone could easily plug into this to charge as long as it's located near the designated parking area. But at, say, an apartment building or a commercial lot, it would likely be covered up since it wouldn't be managed as a charging port. So EV Ready in the image shown includes all the parts up to the end of the pink line at the parking spot and outlet. And finally, EVSE, or electric vehicle supply equipment, is the final part, which is the charging station itself, which allows cars to plug in and charge up. There's many states and jurisdictions that have implemented EV codes already. Many are along the West Coast, with the most in California. And one reason for this is likely the policy I discussed earlier that California has in place, which requires automakers to sell a certain percentage of electric vehicles each year. And this is the policy that Washington State adopted in 2020. So many of the jurisdictions in California have already adopted policies to increase charging infrastructure to meet demand. This slide shows the jurisdictions in Washington that currently have EV codes or are in the process of developing them. The Regional Code Collaboration, or RCC, is a collection of jurisdictions around King County that work together to collect research and develop green codes, which help achieves greater consistency across jurisdictional boundaries. And the RCC developed an EV charging code this past year through a large stakeholder process with jurisdictions, the EV industry, utilities, and interest groups. And the next step is for cities like Issaquah to consider it and modify it as needed for our jurisdiction. So the chart to the left shows the basics of the model RCC code. The proposed King County code is based on this, and each of the other jurisdictions have slightly different codes, but most are pretty similar to this one. In addition, the cities of Bellevue, Kirkland, and Redmond all included the development of EV codes in their recent climate action plans and have expressed interest in using the RCC model for their own jurisdictions as well. So overall, the city's proposed ordinance is based on and very similar to the Regional Code Collaboration's model code. The biggest difference is that the city's ordinance deviates from the RCC's proposed code with an incentive for single family and townhome charging rather than a requirement. So the administration is proposing projects that install EV-ready infrastructure would receive a $350 incentive for each EV parking space installed. So the incentive would be in the form of a reduced building permit fee. And from our research, the incentive would most likely cover the majority, if not all, of the expenses of EV-ready installation for these building types. And we'll look at cost a bit more on one of the future slides. Since 70 to 90% of people charge their vehicles at home, the administration believes it's important to have this incentive to encourage the installation of charging infrastructure when a building is first constructed. And the city is recommending an incentive rather than a requirement because of a state law which prevents cities from making amendments to the state building code that affects the single-family residential construction code without approval from the State Building Code Council. So although this code is in the city's land use code rather than the building code, the administration is recommending the incentives rather than requirements. And in addition, the city is proposing waiving the EV infrastructure requirements for affordable housing units at or below 80% of the area median income. So in other words, the number of affordable housing units does not need to be included in the calculation of EV parking spaces. And overall, developing more affordable housing in Issaquah is really a priority for the city. So we don't want to be adding any additional requirements or costs that could impact a project. However, single family and townhome affordable housing units are still eligible for the EV incentive program. For all new construction of multifamily buildings, the proposed ordinance would require 10% of parking spaces have EVSE, or the complete charging infrastructure. And 30% of all parking spaces would have to be EV ready, meaning that they have the outlet or terminal available to easily install a charging port later. And for all existing multifamily buildings undergoing substantial improvements or retrofits, 10% of all parking spots would have the EVSE, which is the same as new construction, and 20% of the spaces would need to be EV ready. And a substantial improvement is defined as any repair, reconstruction, or improvement of a structure where the cost is equal to or exceeds 50% of the actual cash or market value, so fairly substantial project. Since most EV charging happens at home, the proposed ordinance places higher EV infrastructure requirements on multifamily residential buildings than non-residential buildings. So for all non-residential buildings, 5% of all parking spaces would have EV-SC, and 10% of spaces would be EV ready. So these requirements apply to both new construction and substantial improvements. And then there's also the same requirement for any new paved surface parking lots and parking garages. And these are all the same percentages from that regional code collaborations model ordinance. Here's a table with the cost estimates for EV supply equipment and EV ready installation. So the costs for EV ready and EV-SC new construction are shown in those first two columns, with the total cost in the third column. And the last column shows the estimated cost for retrofitting. So these costs were deducted by King County through their research, as well as through consultation with EV charging infrastructure companies. And the cost of the EV infrastructure installation will really vary based on factors like building type, the charging type that they decide to use, whether it's either a smart charger or a dumb charger, so one that's not connected through internet. So there's more capabilities with the smart chargers. And then also whether it's a new construction project or a retrofit project. And it's important to note that EV readiness retrofits cost 2 to 8 times more than EV ready construction due to several factors, including breaking and repairing walls add costs, upgrading electric service panels when needed, breaking and repairing parking spaces and or sidewalks, adding more expensive methods of conduit installation, and additional permitting and inspection costs from those actions. So overall, this is why it's important to install EV infrastructure when a building is first built, since it'll be lasting for 30, 50 plus years. As I mentioned earlier, we had an initial conversation with City Council about this at the study session on Tuesday. And there was a lot of discussion around the first two pieces I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation on single family requirements versus incentives, and then also the policy discussion about affordable housing. So the council had this initial discussion, but really wants to hear both from this commission as well as the environmental board, see what they think and hear the thoughts for moving forward with the proposal and specific these elements. So the third item that came up about wanting to look more closely at how the proposal should treat transit-oriented development or TOD projects. We heard from a developer that they had concerns about added cost of projects, and he expressed that parking is already expensive and the project is close to transit, so doesn't want to add more costs for doing the EV requirements. We also heard from a resident and an interest group who expressed concern with the waiver for affordable housing due to equity concerns. And a brief summary of the concerns they were talking about is that overall lower income people are disproportionately impacted by climate and pollution, including pollution from vehicles. So as electric vehicles are getting cheaper to buy and they're already cheaper to own, there's concern about exempting affordable housing, which would preclude them from the benefits of EV ownership in the future. And I'm happy to answer any questions about these topics in just a moment too. So here is a timeline showing the next steps for the EV proposal. On January 27th, I'll be bringing this to the newly formed environmental board. We just had their first meeting last night, so this will be a topic of discussion for their second meeting. And I'll be sharing both the discussion we have tonight as well as what we heard at the study session. And then it will return to council study session on February 9th. It would also need a public hearing by PPC and further council action. But we want to hear what your commission and the environmental board have to say about it before doing that. So with that, thank you. And that concludes my presentation for the evening.
Thank you for the presentation. I think it covers a lot. I do have a question from Commissioner Zaragoza. He would like to.
Hi, yeah. Could you explain the difference in the total cost from the different types of developments? The apartments seem to be a lot more than other ones? Can you explain the difference in, I guess, technology, or why they would cost so much? There'd be such a difference in cost.
Sure. I think there's several different factors, including that charging type. With single family and townhomes, we're looking at just mostly the EV ready construction, because with that you can just plug into the plug point. You don't need the charging station as much as you'd need it in a multifamily or commercial building. As you get bigger in the buildings, there's more parking required. So some parking would be out in a parking lot. Other parking would be, if it's structured parking, both of those add costs rather than doing it more simply in a driveway or a single family garage. Conduit has to run farther distances. Channels are in different places. So there's just kind of added costs for those bigger building types.
So I want to again ask all of the commissioners to introduce themselves when they ask a question. I have a question from Commissioner Lewis.
Commissioner Joy Lewis, thank you, Madam Chair. And just a quick note for our new members, we're so happy to have you here. And it helps when using the chat to just put in question or comment because we are here for the public and being recorded. And so just a quick little reminder on that. The one question I had that came up was specifically regarding the number of incentives that developers are able to use. Is there a restriction? Are they able to pick and choose, like take your top 3? Or is every incentive that a developer qualifies for able to be used, Megan? Or
are you specifically talking about EV incentives or any sorts of incentives?
Any sort of incentives that we offer developers. I'm curious, when we talk about using kind of the carrot versus stick, restriction versus incentive. And so I'm curious, are you able to basically amass an unlimited amount of incentives when you're doing a project in Issaquah, or do we currently have a limit on how many you're able to pick? Or
as far as I know, any projects would be able to participate in any incentive programs. So if there's affordable housing incentive, it would be able to participate in that, and any other ones available. I don't think there's a limit specifically.
That's what I had thought. I'm curious for our TOD or the projects. There already is a restriction in the amount of parking. Isn't that correct? I'm having trouble sometimes remembering what we recommend and what actually ends up getting passed. So it's helpful for staff to kind of remind me when we were doing all of our parking requirements. Transit-oriented developments already have a lower amount of requirements. Isn't that correct?
I think I can jump in here. This is Kristen Leeson, Senior Planner. We don't have a, there's no lower requirement. They are allowed to go lower if they are within 1/4 of a mile of the transit center. Then they can do 0.75 spaces per unit.
That's what I thought. Thank you. That's a good reminder. That's a good refresher. And then my last question, because I have a few more, I just wanted to, before I turn it over to somebody else. Megan, one thing I had asked you about was regarding specifically our development agreements. If you have the data on, I know we had mentioned in the meeting that council had that Costco is at 5%. Do you have any other information on the other development agreements?
Yes, and thank you for sending that. So I was able to get some help from some colleagues on data for that. So with the city's 5 development agreements that we have, we don't have any requirements for EV infrastructure in any of those. There are some sustainability elements of each of those development agreements, which vary in what they ask of the developer. So in 3 of those different development agreements, EV infrastructure is an option that a developer could use to meet that sustainability requirement, and it varies a little bit in each of them. And then 2 of them have incentive based, so they're able to reduce their parking minimums. But there is no requirement in any of the city documents. There is a requirement at the state level, however, that that commercial buildings need to have 5% with EV infrastructure. but the way they define EV infrastructure is they could either have 5% of parking spaces have EV chargers, or just to have space in the electrical panel for the chargers. So that's a pretty big or there, I would say. So they can install chargers to fulfill that, or they can just have the space for it.
So I have a question from Commissioner Milligan.
Great, thank you. This is Nina Milligan. And a question of process here. I have 3 questions. Do I ask them all at once, or do I want to do one at a time as we go round robin? Oh, I'm off mute. Can you not hear me?
Now,
Can you hear me?
so let's do one at a time.
One at a time. Okay. My first question, Megan, is when we're talking about a percentage of a multifamily parking garage that has EV infrastructure, how does that work when you've got, 100 units or something, and there are 5% of those? Who gets to park in those, and how do they manage the time that is allotted to each parking person?
Mm-hmm. I think that's up to the property manager themselves, and I think it's managed in different ways. So by having a smart charger, which a lot of multifamilies would do, you can kind of schedule when your car is being charged, or you can look at the charger and see when someone is plugged in or not plugged in. So if someone is plugged in when you get there, then you might have to wait and go plug it in after dinner, after they've removed their car. So that's one of the reasons I think why it's important to make sure we're building enough of this infrastructure so that it's easy to have an electric vehicle and charge when needed. So by having that infrastructure in place, it allows people to be able to do that. Some might have time limits on them, and that might be the way that they enforce it. But I think that would take a lot of kind of oversight to do that. At a couple of recent projects that we've seen, some of the larger multifamily buildings, we've been seeing about 1% of the spots have EV infrastructure or EV chargers in place, and they seem to be pretty busy. So if you're moving into a building and there's usually a car parked there, that would probably prevent someone from wanting to buy an electric vehicle if there's not charging available.
So there's a comment from Deputy City Administrator Snyder.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I no longer have a comment. I think Kristen answered the previous question well. Thank you.
I have never mind. I have another question for Commissioner Zaragoza. Oops. Yeah.
Hi, thank you, Richard Zaragoza. So I had questions about kind of future-proofing the charging stations. As electric cars kind of evolve and get a little faster, there's shorter times. Is that generally up to the port that you're plugging into, or will that affect what we're actually going to be installing into the permanent sections that we're installing into the buildings? How does that work?
Mm-hmm. So the ordinance doesn't say the type of charger that should be installed, so that is left up to the building. And it varies a little bit about kind of how many chargers are hooked up to the same infrastructure, and the types of cars that are just charging up. So overall, that level 2 charging is kind of the most common, and people are able to charge their cars within a few hours. If there's more cars hooked up to the same port, it might take a little bit longer for some of the cars, so it does vary a little bit. There's also cars that can go with older electric vehicles. There's cars that are only going 80 miles, whereas the average now is really closer 200, 250 miles. So that might factor into the charging as well. And I think as far as the future proofing part, there's likely to be new types of chargers in the future. Something that is fairly new right now is wireless charging. So you can have something in your driveway and you drive your car over it. That hasn't really come out a lot yet. But I think this ordinance to some degree takes that into consideration in not requiring, we're requiring more EV ready than more actual chargers. Recognizing that there could be changes in technology, there could be improvements. So when they're able to start adding more chargers in the future because they already have that EV ready infrastructure, they can take that into consideration.
So there's a question from Commissioner Milligan.
Thank you. I think Ron Fall was passed over. Ron, are you looking to ask a question?
Yep.
Okay, I don't want to jump ahead of you. I'll go after you.
No, go ahead. I'll let John call him in.
Okay, I'll go and then you can go. Okay, my next question regards commercial properties. We have retail and commercial all bundled up together, where in a retail situation, you might come in for 10 minutes or a half an hour, and a job, you might come in and stay there for 8 hours and really get a decent charge. Is there any consideration to increasing the number of percentages for commercial buildings that have, say, job centers in them?
Mm-hmm. I think, for commercial, the type of building does really depend, like you're saying, but it could also change over. So it could be a retail space and then later an office space. So there's just kind of that one standard 5% for the commercial, partly for that reason. Also, another reason why that is lower is because people do primarily charge at home. But people, like you're saying, they might go to a store or to work to charge. We also, as you know, we already have a lot of buildings in Issaquah. So there's a lot of existing building that doesn't have the infrastructure in place. So some of those commercial chargers offer people that may be living in a multifamily that don't have a charger an ability to charge at a different location.
I didn't pass over Commissioner Fall. What I did say was never mind. If you would like to ask a question now, please do.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is Ron Fall. I have two questions, and I will recap them first. The first one is about some of the incentives, and the second one is concerning the percentages for EV ready. When we do a major development, either a new development or a major retrofit, I think 30% for multifamily is probably too low. The reason why I'm saying that is because looking out 20, 30 years from now, California is expected to have reduced the number of gas combustion sold vehicles to almost zero. So they are not going to allow in 30 years the sale of combustion engines. So I think we're going to see a significant increase in electric car use. And looking at the 30% for EV ready, I think is limiting us. It's basically cutting us in the Achilles heel because of retrofit costs. There are different technologies for EV stations, and so I'm not going to get into the EV stations themselves, but there are 30 amp systems, there are 40 amp systems, and there are 50 amp systems. The 30 amp systems take twice as long to charge a car as a 50 amp system. So if you have an apartment complex, you want the 50 amp system because your tenants are going to be able to charge your cars faster if you're sharing the same space. But to put a 50 amp line through a retrofit, or let's say conduit ready, because that's one of the things I saw in the packet was one of the an EV ready may be conduit but no wire. If you have that, you're trying to run 50 amp lines for maybe 50 stalls out of 100, you're going to need all new breaker panels because that is a lot of amperage. and running those 50 amp lines through conduit is going to be an enormous task. That's really stiff wire, and you got 4 zero gauge wires that you're running through for 50 amp lines. It's almost impossible to run that stuff through conduit. So I think by not having higher numbers up front for EV ready, I think is really detrimental to us because people aren't going to want to do it. It's going to be very costly. If you think it's $14,000 now to do a retrofit, it's probably going to cost at least $100,000 20, 30 years out from now. So I think we need to revisit that, even though King County may be saying 30% is what their proposed limits are. I think from our standpoint, why don't we make it more? And then the other question I have is for incentives. I'd like to learn more about what would be some of the incentives for affordable housing in the TOD project, because as electric vehicles become cheaper, I think electric vehicles will be more affordable for low-income people to drive. And so if we don't have TOD projects in with these requirements, then we're going to be limiting those people, even though there may be an upfront cost now to build those systems in. We need to have them now, because now is going to be a lot cheaper than it will be 20, 30 years from now, when those people are going to require it and they can't get it because we didn't build it in when we should have. Thanks. That was a lot long-winded, but
Thank you. Yeah, so for the first part about looking at the EV readiness and the total percentage, I think that there's a lot of people that probably would agree with you that 30 might be low. There's probably people on the other side as well. I think through kind of this stakeholder process that the regional code collaboration went through, they're listening to both of those sides. The legislation that you mentioned that was passed in California prohibiting gas vehicles, there was similar legislation that came before that was in front of Washington in 2020 that did not pass, but it's expected that that might make its way through in Washington in later years as well. So I agree, EVs will be rising. So that's something to think about with that piece. For the second piece, with the incentives for affordable housing and TOD, with the current proposal, we are not offering incentives for that. So that was part of one of the pieces that we were interested in hearing that type of feedback from. So we have the incentives in place in the current proposal for single family and townhomes, since we're not able to do the requirement for them. But we don't have anything in that current proposal for affordable housing or TOD.
and why do we not have incentives for affordable housing and TOD?
So in the current proposal, the way it is that we were exempting affordable housing. So they wouldn't need to meet the requirements.
So if we don't have the requirements, the developer probably isn't going to build it. So therefore, we're going to be handicapping the people living in TOD projects because they're not going to have electric vehicle access, where a townhouse that does have the subsidies, that probably has a higher income, will have access to it. So now we're talking about equality disparity between the two. So it doesn't make much sense for us to incentivize low income and not TOD projects, even though I know TOD projects are supposed to be transit oriented, but a lot of people living there are still going to have cars. I don't know. I need help with this. It doesn't make sense to me. It just doesn't pass the sniff test.
So the next question is from the smiling Commissioner Boyce.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Curtis Murphy. I do have to agree with Commissioner Fowl. I mean, the mission statement kind of is contradictory. On page 12, the explanation for waiving EV parking requirements really kind of go against page 10, reasoning why they're important in multifamilies and affordable housing. So that's kind of strange literature. Might want to look at taking that out in your explanation. I really am not bothered by the TOD projects being exempted, but affordable housing, if we really are trying to make it more equitable for people, seems like at least incentives would work there pretty well. I actually think the numbers are pretty solid for where they need to be. And I'm okay with, I don't even think it's up to us as far as residential single families and townhomes. The bottom line is we can always revisit this in the future. Right now, EVs only make up 4% of Washington State's car population. And a big part of that's probably because Tesla made an EV that actually looks like a car. So I think as we see more cars and models that actually resemble something that we're all familiar with, you're going to see more people invest in them. At 4%, it's kind of hard to ask developers to invest 50% of their parking lot in EV ready. I mean, Safeway is a walk. So again, I think we can always come back and look at this and fine tune it in 5 to 10 years. Point of clarification, as far as the percentage tables, I think I know the answer to this, but I'll ask it anyway. If you need 10% that has to be EVSE ready, that would not go towards the EV ready percentage, correct?
Correct. You need to meet both requirements separately.
Okay, and then one more question is, I noticed in the literature it also said that Puget Sound Energy had a pretty popular program. Why was that discontinued? And could we lobby them to bring it back? I know they're a private company, but they are a public utility as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so PSE needs to spend a certain dollar amount on various incentives. So that program that they had was very popular. It was offering incentives for single family chargers, and that quickly ran out of money. A newer program that they have been looking at is kind of doing pilots in some multifamily and commercial buildings. So I think that they're testing different things. They did their single family incentive. Now they're working on some multifamily commercial incentive. But they know that this is coming. They have a transportation electrification draft plan. They did a survey to their customers, and 68% said that they expect to be buying or leasing an EV. So they're planning for it now. So I expect that there may be incentives from them in the future as well.
Okay, and then one final thought, just real quickly, in hopes of being transparent, that 4% number I came up with was taken about a year and a half ago from a Como News article in June of 2019. Those numbers might have changed by now. But again, it's a very small part of the population at this point. And then as far as public utilities, school districts, government-owned buildings and facilities, as far as making them ESVE ready, what would the cost be to city government in cases of upkeep, hoses, vandalism, things like that, energy bills? What's that look like for the city?
Mm-hmm. I don't have specific dollars for that, but the city is the owner of 2 charging ports four charging stations, which serves 8 vehicles. And so we do keep that under our public works operations, is able to maintain those. I don't have exact costs on what that is, but it is built into the city's program and budget to have those.
I have a question from Commissioner Lewis.
Thank you, Commissioner Joy Lewis here. I want to thank Ron for bringing up something that I think is really important about this proposal. I agree with Jason's comments that we start off talking about why this is necessary now. What are the benefits? What do we really see happening in the short term to our community and the need? And then we go and say, well, but we're going to instead, not only are we going to exempt projects that are pretty important to our community, but we're not going to propose a plan for any kind of moving away from that. So I don't know that I have a problem with the numbers right now. I understand that we kind of need to start somewhere, and that there is a likelihood that over time that those numbers can get adjusted as we need, and we can amend our code. We've seen that time and time again. Sitting here on this commission, but I do have some serious concerns right now about the exemptions. And I really would like to encourage some type of long-term strategy to help all people to have access to clean technology. I'm curious if there almost needs to be a trade-off, right? If you think that for some reason exempting these projects are going to be so vital to having them be built, then I'd like to see something like a public projects plan, right? Where can anybody from the public go and be able to charge, right? We need to have some sort of offset to say, if we're not going to do it one place, then how else can we do it? And I didn't really see that in this proposal. And so I'd really like to kind of use this forum to kind of start talking about the plan to really have open access to clean technologies for everybody. And so rather than kind of talking maybe specifically about the exemption in this space, I'd love to hear from the city as far as kind of what your trade-off is.
In terms of the affordable housing and
Yeah, in terms of saying we're going to, right now the proposal is to exempt TODs and projects that have affordable housing, but there needs to be an offset, right? Because right now we're saying commercial only needs to have 5%, right? So if I live in affordable housing, and the whole idea is to create an equitable community, right? So we do that right now with jobs and with housing. So I live in affordable housing and I work in Issaquah, which is the goal. We want people to be able to work, play, live here. But my building I'm not able to charge my vehicle because there's only a 5% requirement for my building. Plus, I don't have it where I live because they've been exempted, and developers aren't going to put it in unless they've been incentivized or made to. So where is then the space, right? Because right now we're just leaving out a huge subset of a population that is disproportionately affected by the effects of climate change. So what is our plan for all of our community, including low-income members of our community, to be able to have access to it? So I'd love to hear like what the plan is for a public projects program or proposal to be able to have charging available when we're saying we only need to have 5% commercial and these other places are exempt. Where are they going to be doing it?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, so I think the first part of that, just a little bit of clarification on the ordinance as it's written now. So it is exempting affordable housing, like you mentioned. TOD is not actually mentioned or called out in the current proposal. That was something that came up at the study session on Tuesday. The council wanted your input exactly on that sort of project, if that should be exempted or not, or if that should be handled any differently. So that wasn't in the proposal yet. As far as the affordable housing, the overall thought with that is that we all agree we need more affordable housing in Issaquah, and we haven't been getting as much as we want to be seeing. So the concern was adding any additional costs, just not wanting to put that additional burden before we're getting the housing that we want to see. We have heard the equity concerns as well, so I think that is something that we'll want to think a little bit more about. And to your point about a plan, so if we are going to exempt them, then would we be looking at more public charging stations, or, as you're saying, or having map or access to the other charging stations? What's their proximity to affordable housing? So I think those are some questions that we will be digging into a little bit more.
So there's another question from Commissioner Milligan.
Thank you. This is Nina Milligan. I have two little questions, and I'll save my comments for later. Could you reiterate whether we can require EV ready or ESEV for single family townhomes?
Yes, well, no, but yes, I will go into it. So overall, there is a requirement for the single family and townhomes are not able to have additional requirements beyond what is in the state residential building code. So they're not allowed to have additional building requirements. That doesn't preclude them from having additional land use requirements, but they are not allowed to have additional building code requirements unless it is something that is reviewed and approved by the State Building Code Council.
Okay.
So electric.
That's good. That's what I wanted to know. I just didn't quite get that earlier. And then I have one more question that has to do with TOD. Is there an assumption that transit-oriented development is affordable housing?
I don't think so. I think it's often included in it, but I think it doesn't have to be. That's my understanding of it, unless there's any other staff that has a different opinion.
Excellent, thank you.
So we have a comment from Deputy City Administrator Snyder.
Thank you, Commissioner Probola. I have been listening to this great discussion and all these questions, and sometimes I want to weigh in on them, but I put myself in the queue and then they're quickly answered by our more than capable staff, Megan and Kristen. So just to underscore the point that Megan just made a few moments ago regarding affordable housing, I heard Commissioner Fall say, it just doesn't pass the sniff test. This doesn't make sense. And to underscore what Megan said, I think the thought behind it was just the concern that affordable housing developers already are up against different financial requirements when it comes to financing, as well as a little bit less flexibility than market rate developers when it comes to recouping costs. So their margins are different and everything else. So there was just a concern that by increasing requirements for affordable housing developers, then does that then hinder another one of the city's goals, which is to increase our supply of affordable housing? I think I've heard some other comments tonight for other ways to approach that, and as Megan said, giving it more thought is something that I think we really want to do. So appreciate the comments and thoughts that you have tonight on this topic. Absolutely. The second thing that I wanted to address, which was the comment that Commissioner Lewis made on, what is the city's thoughts on a public project or something that's more accessible to the public? Great question. I don't know that we have thought that much about it. What I would say is that we do have currently some electric vehicle charging stations that are available to the public. And they're located at City Hall Northwest. I know of those two. There might be a few others that I'm not aware of, but Megan's nodding her head, so she can tell me where those other ones are. But we already have we have a couple. Could we use some more? Great questions, great thoughts. Certainly worth a little bit more thought. But we have a couple now, so we're not incredibly behind the 8 ball here. So thank you for the opportunity to comment. And my final thing, Megan, I know you had some discussion questions that you brought up in your presentation at the beginning of the evening. I don't know if this would be helpful to you or to our commissioners to pull those up again so that they can make sure that they are asking additional questions on those discussion questions or providing the input that you were hoping to hear tonight. All right, thank you.
So the purpose of this meeting is to get feedback on and answer those questions, plus obviously creating some other ones that we have come up with. But I'd like to finish a couple comments that have been in the queue before we look at those specifically. So I'd like to go to Commissioner Monahan, who has a comment or question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Megan, for your presentation this evening. A question about the single family and townhomes. Is it envisioned to be a one-time incentive, or would a builder be able to get 2 incentives by installing 2 ports in a garage?
great technical legal question there, I think. So in it, we say that we still need to figure out the administrative procedures for that, which I think it falls under, but the overall intent would be that it would be an incentive for per unit. So if you're installing two at one house, then that would only be one incentive.
Okay, thank you.
So there's a question from Commissioner Fall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is Commissioner Fall. So from a cost standpoint, as far as affordable housing and TOD projects, I believe that we should treat low income and TOD projects equally. I don't want to limit people. If we don't offer it and if we don't require it, it's not going to get done. And if you look at, go back to the 1970s when GM and Ford looked at Honda and with despair and said, you know, no one's going to ever buy a Honda. And we went through an oil crisis. And now we have fuel efficiency standards, right? And so back then, General Motors and Ford would say, we can't build our cars to be this, you know, getting 25 miles to the gallon. Are you, it's not possible. And now we're getting 35 and 40 miles to the gallon. Without pushing and creating requirements from a legal standpoint, industry isn't going to move forward and adopt it. So I think we need to be relatively tough and put down our foot and say, you know, you need to put this in every development. It's not even a question. And I think we shouldn't be fearful of that. I think long-term electric cars are going to replace gas cars. I mean, California is doing it. Washington State wants to do it. I believe electric cars are going to be cheaper. If we don't require it, we're hamstringing those people that are going to be living in shared housing, community housing, whether you want to call it low income or TOD projects or single family townhomes. The other thought is, because we're so early in this phase, if we decide to have higher standards, is there a way that maybe the city could reach out and find or help find grants to help offset some of these costs so that we get what we need, we can get what our customers, our residents need to have a higher standard of living in these low affordable housing situations. And I really think the short-term costs are going to be much less expensive than the long-term costs. So if we push this stuff out and say, well, we're not going to have such a high 30% adoption rate for new development, in 20 years from now, we're not going to get it. Developers aren't going to, there's no incentive for anyone to go back and put in retrofit systems. It just won't happen. And we're going to be stuck with all these gas vehicles on the road, and these residents are going to be upset because they're not going to be able to get their cars charged. It's an accident waiting to happen. And I think if we take the right approach and embrace the environmental benefits behind it, as well as the cost benefits on it, I think the city could really make a big improvement in our community quality of living. So I'm worried that it's not going to get done if we're too light-footed about it.
Next is a comment from Commissioner Boyce.
I am so glad I get to follow Commissioner Fowl because now I get to play a little bit of devil's advocate. All of you guys are familiar with Kevin Costner's Field of Dreams, right? If you build it, they will come. Right now in building, Zoom rooms are all of the rage, right? Because that's what the market's bearing. So I am a believer in the market, and if that is what the market wants, the market will get it. I think all of us here know that our beloved city is one of the toughest cities in terms of regulations for developers. And continuing for Issaquah to continue to get that reputation, we're going to scare developers off. And again, these are all things that can be amended down the road. So we have to find a happy balance. I mean, if, again, Issaquah is known for being one of the toughest cities to build in, even without the moratorium that happened a couple of years ago. So while I understand the point, you know, you want to set a high bar. We've set a high bar in a lot of different areas as far as our building codes. So again, I do think as these electric vehicles come to market, as they actually start to resemble vehicles, more people will start to buy them. To Ms. Curtis Murphy's point, we don't even have price parity yet with these vehicles. They don't even extend to the range. My truck gets 360 miles. So the electric vehicle companies still have some work to do before people want the cars themselves. And like I said, if we start putting in these hard regulations now, that could create a situation where people are no longer developing in our city. So again, I believe we need to start somewhere, to Commissioner Lewis's point, and I think we have a good starting point right now. And again, all of these things can come back and be revisited in 5 to 10 years. So that's my piece. Thank you, Commissioner Fowl. You served that one up to me.
So that prompted some other questions. So I have a question from Commissioner Zaragoza.
Thank you, Richard Zaragoza. I actually had a comment on a question, but I wanted to second what Commissioner Fowl actually said. The packet says that we're going to reach price parity by 2023. So that's 2 years from now. Once that happens, my assumption is that adoption of EVs will be exponential. So that 4% could be 50% in 10 years, not 20 years, something like that. So I agree, we might be not being aggressive enough with the numbers that we're currently thinking about. That's my comment. Just wanted to second that.
So we'll follow that with a comment from Commissioner Carl.
Thank you. This is Janice Carl. Really appreciate all of the thought and questions and comments that have been raised so far. I have to say, here's my teeny tiny question. On the table of cost estimates, I'm just going crazy trying to understand the difference in EV ready costs for townhome versus single family duplex. So I'd really like to understand where that $3,600 came from as opposed to $375. But my more substantive comment is I'm really concerned. So when we are trying to represent broad and varying interests in our community, it means we have to set priorities. We're not always going to be able to pursue all things equally, especially when they interact with one another like this affordable housing requirement or waiver issue does. I think the point that making additional costs fall on developers who are already facing challenges in that line of business, and also in doing business with the city, is probably a substantive concern in terms of attracting the affordable housing that we need now. We need yesterday. Whereas EV charging in affordable housing, you're really going to have to work hard to convince me that that's a major issue for that population in the next 5 years. I'm not saying I'm right. It's just what I feel in my heart. So again, that's my primary comment, that probably from my perspective, availability of affordable housing is more important than providing EV charging. And so providing that waiver there makes sense to me. But I do wonder about that $3,600 cost for a space in a townhome. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that question. That came up during the council meeting on Tuesday, and the answer had left my brain at that moment, but I have it now. So thank you for asking that. There is a large variation there because it depends on the situation. So there's two reasons that could make that cost a lot more expensive. One is if it is for a townhome, if it's like parking underneath the building, that could add some more cost there, rather than just a spot right next to above ground right next to the home. The other reason is that in some cases, if say a single family home was going to be torn down and there's multi-family or townhomes going up, in very rare cases, there might need to be a transformer update, which would be a larger cost. So that would be represented there. City of Seattle has an exemption for that in their code. It is not something they haven't gotten any seen any waivers for that because it's so not common, but they do have that exemption. So that is why that is such a big difference.
So the last question is from Commissioner Fall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Commissioner Fall. So
I'm not a mayor yet. Not a mayor.
Did I say mayor or did it say Madam?
You said mayor.
Oh, oops.
Not a mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
That sounds better.
All right, so I'm going to add on to Commissioner Richards' comment and Janice's comment and to Megan's comment. So, and to Jason's as well. If we look at it from an infrastructure standpoint, where I'm not saying put the stations in, I'm saying EV ready. And I think we need to be prepared for it because if you look around Issaquah, half of our apartment complexes were built in the 50s. That's over 60, 65 years old. So if we're going to build new apartment complexes, what's the likelihood that they're going to be 50, 65 years before they're torn down? We're not tearing down apartments right now, but those old apartments are still there. The infrastructure to support EV is you need 50 amp lines ran, you need transformers, you need service panels. And when the building is being built, that stuff is really cheap to put in. Conduit is like, you can buy a 10-foot section of conduit that's 3 inches for $10 a pipe. So we're not talking about a lot of cost to require the capacity to handle EV systems or making them EV ready. If you don't want to run the lines, okay, I'll compromise with not running the lines, but have the conduit in place, at least for these complexes. So when the time comes that EV should be installed in these systems, it's not so cost prohibitive to the developer or to the residents that they can't afford to install it. But if we do it now, if we require it now, we're not putting a lot of upfront cost in it, but it's getting built with the capacity to be able to handle it, right? So I just think it's a bad thing to overlook because we know this. We know for fact we're going down this road, right? So electric vehicles is going to be the thing of the future because combustion is getting to the point where we have too many environmental issues with it. The industry wants the electric cars. Industry is telling us that electric cars will be cheaper to manufacture than gas cars. So there's so many different reasons to say EV is going to be the future, maybe 20 years. So to Janice's point, maybe there won't be anything in the 5-year term, right? Maybe we'll be slight increase, but in 10, 15 years, we could see exponential growth. And if our residents aren't able to charge their cars, it's going to be miserable. When I worked at Microsoft, it was those people who drove electric cars in and wanted to charge them. There were never enough chargers. And so you have, people are always complaining that there aren't enough chargers. There's like 20 chargers in each Microsoft building. And it's like, you got to be kidding. That's how many people are driving electric cars. So I think there is demand. What's keeping us from enjoying that demand is that people are worried about getting the car charged. So, and I think if we alleviate that, it'll happen. If to Jason's point, if we build it, they will come. Thank you. I feel very passionate about this. I think we're just underselling it, and we need to stiffen the requirements. And I don't think it's going to add that much cost to developers. And maybe if it does, we can help them incentivize it with grants. All right. Thank you.
Now, I have a comment from Commissioner Lewis.
Thank you, Commissioner Joy Lewis. Megan, do you mind putting up that slide that's guiding our 3 things that we want to have our discussion about right now? Because we're having a lot of great discussion, and I want to kind of gear us to the fact that we have more than one thing that we're looking at right now. I have a specific ask. After we are looking at this, the next group to look at it is our. We're very proud of our brand new commission, our brand new board, I should say. And I'd love to have the board members. Obviously, they're going to have the presentation we had. I'd really like them to kind of focus on something that I think needs to be drilled down a little bit more on a micro level, and that is this discussion of incentives versus code regulations. The cities that have gone before us, our forebears in California, have a lot of great data for us. It's something that I had asked you about, Megan, in the email. But I'd love for them to be presented with a little more information and data about how previous municipalities have gone about this, and to be able to have a really hardcore discussion for our environmental board to come back and have a more concrete discussion and have a more concrete resolution when we go to council of saying, this is why we want to use incentives. This is why we want to use regulations, and being able to drill that down a little bit more with some more data. So I think they're a really good place for that board to really look at that discussion and to see how we want to guide it. So that would be my recommendation specifically about that. I also want to say that at this point, without seeing a concrete plan from the city about how we're going to offset the subsequent waivers for affordable housing, that I have some serious questions about it. Right now, really helping and protecting economically vulnerable populations needs to be accounted for in this situation. Electric cars, we know, are cheaper to maintain. They're also better to use as far as car share programs, which are also the future as far as tools and resources that we have to combat climate change. And they're just a better resource for a lot of economically vulnerable members of our community. So having that availability in some form needs to be addressed if we're going to go ahead and say and stick with right now the city's recommendation of a waiver. So I'd like to see the next time that we have this discussion to have a more concrete example of this is how we're going to address it if you want to have the waivers. Because I agree with Janice's comment. Sometimes you got to rob Peter to pay Paul. So we can't really have everything that we want. So if we're going to prioritize being able to limit the amount of restrictions on developers who are going to be helping us to achieve our affordable housing goals, then we need to have a plan for how we're going to be addressing the lack of disparity. So the other thing I would say is that from where I'm sitting, I don't think the TOD project should be handled any differently. I think that it's a natural inclination for us to be putting affordable housing. So there is an overlap with TOD, and I do think that there is a natural overlap for people to be having less reliance on vehicles, but having them exempt, I think goes to Ron's point that being able to have that readiness is really important when we look at that cost of retrofitting and for new buildings. And so that's where I'm sitting right now on those kinds of points. And I'd love to hear more from the city the next time that we talk, and really being able to have that board come back to us with their suggestions for this as well.
I think from the comments that we've had this evening that there is a lot. This is a complicated situation, and I think that before we approve or the council approves this kind of a regulation, that we need to have a better understanding of what the costs are and what the problems are, and be more confident of what we're going to be addressing in the way of affordable housing. There is a comment in the chat box from Commissioner Carl.
Thank you again. This is Janice Carl. I second Joy's recommendation that TOD projects not be subject to any special considerations. Their status as multifamily projects are primarily considered transit-oriented development because they're close to transit, and that is going to not necessarily require any additional subsidies, I would think. And if they do include affordable housing, then they would be able to take advantage of the exemptions for those particular units. So I think that that is a reasonable compromise. I would like to suggest that, given Ron's comment, and I do believe in paying a little bit now to save a lot later, might we consider the EV capable categorization as part of our options for making requirements? The memo and the presentation, and I think the proposal, primarily focuses on EV ready and actually having equipment in place. But the background memo also talked about just making sure that the infrastructure is there to facilitate implementation of the wiring and other hardware later. So just called conduit only. We might make that a requirement with much higher percentages as a way of laying the groundwork for better volume of service later. Thank you.
There's an additional comment from Commissioner Zaragoza.
Thank you, Richard Zaragoza. I definitely second what Janice was just saying about the EV capable at a much larger number. I think that makes a lot of sense. But also I wanted to comment on the incentives. I think incentives are a great idea. I support those. And it also makes a lot of sense that affordable housing is a priority, so the waiver does make sense. But as Commissioner Lewis suggested, offsetting that with some kind of increased incentive or public station, something like that, if that could be added into the recommendation, I think that would make a lot of sense to me. Thank you.
I have a comment from Commissioner Milligan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to wrap up with a few comments in the providing feedback. And God, really appreciate this discussion. I am so glad to be part of this group. Let me join ranks with Ron and Janice, and thank you for that refinement, Janice. I think it is a priority to put in the EV capable, if not the EV ready, and even at higher percentages if we could. You know, I would go for that, getting more coverage at a lower level of infrastructure so that we don't have to go retrofit. That I think is the most important. And especially if we could look at increasing those percentages required in commercial buildings where there are jobs. As far as the discussion about affordable housing and TOD, those two weave in and out of each other sometimes, and sometimes they don't. I agree with the commissioners who say that that we should not exempt affordable housing because those people need EV plug-ins in the near future just as much as anybody else, and why leave them out? I wholeheartedly agree with that, and it's my observation, although somewhat amateur, that there will be other forces greater determining how many affordable housing units we get, especially if we get into the circumstances where we require affordable housing to be developed, which is where I think we need to go, rather than softballing, oh gee, can I make it worth your while? We require affordable housing, and projects should have requirements, and we shouldn't have such a thing as EV plug-ins making it so we can't do an affordable housing project. And the last thing is the transit-oriented development. If it's being built as intended, that you're using transit instead of cars, the reduced need for parking altogether would reduce the need for EV infrastructure. But then, as I said, as it weaves with affordable housing, we wouldn't want to purposefully leave out that population. Incentives for single family and townhomes, fine. Sure wish we could require it, especially in new construction. If we could do it, I would require it in new construction and have the credit for homeowners doing retrofits. So that's my feedback. Tell them what I think. And thank you again, you guys. This is really fun.
So I have a comment from Commissioner Boyce.
All right. Well, to just reiterate what Commissioner Zaragoza and Commissioner Carl said, I think Commissioner Carl hit on something that I think all of us could probably agree on. One thing we don't see in our charts is the cost of having it just be EV capable. And I know Commissioner Fowle's coming up right behind me, and I'm sure he has something to say about that, because that might be able to push those numbers up without scaring our developers off. So I would be interested to see more information about EV capable. Again, like I said, it's hard to predict the future. Only 13 years ago, they made the movie Who Killed the Electric Car? So I don't know if it's going to grow exponentially or not. I don't think anybody can really say for certain. I think it's trending upwards, but I do think the EV capable is something to look at. I think that was a great suggestion by Commissioner Carl. So there's that. And then real quickly, I also agree with the use of incentives for single families, because if we could knock off some of their building permit costs, I think most builders would be able to put it down as an amenity where they could actually use it as a selling point. People are getting more and more interested into these smart homes. I myself don't believe it should be a requirement at this point. I don't believe the numbers bear it out. But I believe if you incentivize builders, especially for residential construction, like we see what's going up in Issaquah Highlands, I think you might get some buy-in from them, especially if you're covering a majority of their costs. So I think it's a great idea. I think it's a great program. And as far as the affordable housing and the TOD, to Commissioner Lewis's point, I think we need some more literature there. Because again, the priority really should be getting these units into our city. And we need to, again, these guys they're working with much smaller margins than your Safeways, your QFCs, and also your residential buildings. So we probably need a lot more literature on that before we're able to give a proper response. So thank you.
I have a quick comment from Commissioner Fall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I almost called you Madam Mayor again.
We're going to talk to the real mayor and we'll have a discussion here.
Okay, so this is Commissioner Fall. So I really like what Jason just said. I think he's right on it. So capable I think is really good. I think capable with the panel, because that means the basic core infrastructure is in, and we reduce the cost because we're not running lines. We know that the copper wire is expensive to run. So I think that would be a great solution there that would solve everyone's issue. But the quick comment was also about TOD requirements. Because TOD is right next to a transit system, maybe we could leverage a shared charging station with transit. So if you park at the transit center, you have EV access, and maybe the people living in TOD would also share that same access, because those are all usually paid machines. You require a debit card or a credit card to charge your car anyways. So that might be a really economic way to optimize the situation and expand your resource capability, your bandwidth. That's it. Thanks.
So I have also a quick comment from Senior Planner Leeson.
Hi, oops, I keep turning my video off. There we go. This is Kristen Leeson, and it is a quick comment, and I may have misheard it. But I believe Commissioner Milligan mentioned that we need to require affordable housing, and I don't know if this influences the conversation or contributes to the conversation at all. But just to note that we do require affordable housing in several areas of the city. So our development agreements require affordable housing. So that would be Raleigh, and that would be Lakeside, and I believe still up in Issaquah Highlands, there's some that's still required. And also, if anybody's going to build in our urban core or mixed-use zones, they're also required to do affordable housing as part of residential projects there.
Thank you, Kristen. I'd like to jump in because that's exactly what I'm talking about. The fact that there's EV or not EV isn't what's determining whether we get affordable housing or not. It's regulations that require it or not. So that was awesome. Thank you, Kristen.
Is there anybody else that wants to make a comment before we actually do some more work on the 3 things that are up on the screen? If not, I'd like to say a couple things before I unhook myself from my computer again. I disagree with the incentives for single-family housing. And I know that at the present time, we cannot require it for single-family housing, but from listening to the discussion from the council session on, was it Tuesday? Bellevue has required that, and they are fine. And there was a comment that said from somebody, I thought it was staff, that the group that determines what the building requirements are is actually looking at requiring some of these stations to be put in single-family housing and within the year. And so I think we should follow the direction of some of the other cities that have required it in single-family homes. And I personally do not agree with incentivizing having it EV capable in single-family and townhomes and condos that have garages. I just don't think they should be incentivized. In Issaquah, the medium range for new construction single family is somewhere in the high 700s or 800,000. Putting in an additional $350 to run a cable into the garage while you're putting in all the electric in the house, to me, is not any big deal. Either you can put it in the cost of the house, or you can do what new construction is required to do right now, is to charge $15,000 to put in the sewer system, and you have the option to pay for it up front, or you can do it a certain small amount quarterly till it's paid off. Things like that can happen, and you can go into condos and townhomes in Issaquah. The median price is somewhere around $600,000, and to put in an additional $350 on top of that just doesn't seem reasonable to me. I've been a builder, I've been a realtor, looking at what the single family person owner would gain by having this connection in the garage. If it cost $400 to put in the capable plug, when you go to sell the house, the owner will make $1,500. There will be more cars, electrical cars out there, and more people that will require it. And so this is an added feature to the house. And I I think we should look at that more closely. And I know that we're not allowed basically to look at single family homes, but I think that having Bellevue and some of the other cities set the precedent, and with the knowledge that the powers that be are going to be looking at this year, I think we should be looking at that. To put an incentive to the builder to put in EV capable wiring, you're going to give the incentive to the builder. His cost will be less, but once the homeowner buys the home, you're giving him you're giving him instead of $300, you're giving him $1,200, and that's not fair either. So you have to look at a lot of things in the way they're presented. I think we have a lot of questions and a lot of concerns from what we should do with affordable housing. I don't think that TOD should be restricted or exempt from having at least the capable, the wiring put in. We're talking about new construction, though. We're not talking about retrofit or anything else. We're basically talking about what we should do for new additional construction. And when you look at the numbers that are put out by not only what's required, but what the automotive industry is suggesting, that in a short amount of time, 30 or 40% or more of their cars that are going to be built are going to be either electrical or some hybrid to that. And very soon, we're not going to have the option. And to be able to say, Issaquah Highlands started years ago in making green important in the development, which has spread to all of Issaquah and then spread out everywhere. I think that as a leader, we should be looking at more specific things to do to help climate change. We also have to look at, we don't, but the legislature has to look at, you're taking gas guzzling cars off the road, you're downgrading a lot of the gas that's sold, which the taxes on gas go to do the infrastructure. And even with electric cars, you still need the infrastructure. So all of these things have to be put together, and I don't think that we are in a position to actually make some decisions or recommendations on this. So I'd like to go back to the feedback request and ask all of you to pay more attention of these 3 questions so that we can get some more agreement and maybe some ideas going. I think we've gone way in different directions, and we're getting different ideas, and I like to kind of come to some kind of conclusion, maybe not tonight, but to stimulate some more discussion, because I think it really needs more discussion. There have been 2 sides, and maybe, well, we should look at something about what other options or what other ways can we put this together so that we eventually come up with a goal, a code that meets now and in the future. I like the fact that it's hard to put in some requirements where if you put in more charging stations, you can downgrade the number of parking spaces that you need besides the charging stations. Well, you're going to charge your car for a couple hours, but you need a place for it to go. And so in the TOD development, you are downgrading the number of parking spaces that are required. Then you're going to downgrade again to provide more charging stations. So what is the happy median? So I'd like you to look at those three things that are on the screen now and see if there's anything else that you want to add. I do have a comment from Senior Planner Leeson.
Hi, I was just actually wondering maybe if Megan Curtis Murphy could just sort of summarize what she has on those three topics, and that might help you all to focus and see if there's anything missing. But there were a lot of comments, so I don't know, Megan, if you were able to capture. I think you were able to capture them all, but that may help.
Sure. Yes, this is Megan Curtis Murphy. I'd be happy to do that. And again, I'm probably not going to capture everything everyone said, but I have written down a lot of the great ideas that we heard tonight, and I really appreciate the way that we have focused in on these questions. So thank you for that. So some things that I am hearing going through this list for the use of incentives for single family and townhomes, it sounds like there is some desire that if we could turn this into a requirement in some way, that some commissioners would be interested in that. There's some overall thought that incentives, are they really needed for this type of housing? Either because it's already going to be sold for a high cost, do they really need this additional incentive? Or should the incentives be used for other purposes, such as retrofits or maybe affordable housing? So to dig into this a little bit more with some information. For the use of a waiver for affordable housing units, I'm hearing a lot of comments about equity and wanting to make sure that the group of people living here would have access to EVs as they are becoming more and more common, but also hearing that affordable housing is really expensive, and we need to think about that angle too. And however, it is also required in the city. So we are going to be getting it, as Commissioner Milligan was saying. So, does it need to be waived or not for that purpose? So I am hearing kind of both sides of that. So I think wanting more information on that, about what more of the costs are, if EV capable might be an option here, some more information on that. And then also, if we are going to be keeping the waiver, wanting to hear more information about some sort of public plan for charging. Are they able to use the chargers in the transit station, or other ways to get public access so that they're not precluded from having EVs in the future, even if there is the waiver. Last, for whether the TOD project should be handled differently in the ordinance. I think overall I'm hearing that they shouldn't necessarily be handled differently. That, some of them include affordable housing, a lot do, a lot don't. But that there doesn't necessarily need to be special consideration for that type of project. And again, it sounded like maybe some more information about EV capable might be another option for this type of project, or the others. So again, I am sure I have not captured everything that was said. I have more written down and can definitely rewatch for more of the comments, but I hope I was able to capture some of those. But if there's anything any big items I'm missing, I would be interested in hearing those.
Does anybody else have any questions or comments? Commissioner Boyce?
I think Commissioner Fowle's in front of me, but I do have a comment and a question.
Well, I know you like to go after Commissioner Fowle, so Commissioner Fowle, do you have a question?
Darn. Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's Commissioner Fall. So I just lost my we just lost the questions that we had. Well, I think I remember it. So the use for the incentives for single family and townhomes, I'm against that. I don't think we need it. Retrofits, if you're going to be replacing a breaker panel, if you're going to be doing any kind of major electrical work, the cost difference between 125 amp breaker panel, which is probably what most townhouses have, 200 amp panel is for what most single family homes have, a 250 amp panel that would allow you to have an EV car, the cost difference, we're talking $10 or $20 for a panel. So we're not talking about a lot of cost. I think anytime anyone upgrades their panel, it should be a requirement to have EV capability installed. It doesn't have to be wired for it so much, but they have to have the capacity to be able to handle it. I think that would be a great move forward. And as far as the TOD project, to Megan Curtis Murphy's comment, if we share EV capacity with a transit center, then we don't have to remove any long-term parking spaces possibly from the TOD development, because I don't want to remove car capacity. I know the intent of a TOD is that we get people on the bus or alternative transportation instead of driving a car. But if you look at Atlas, half those people are parking in the Safeway parking lot or on the street because there just isn't enough capacity because we didn't provide enough parking. But I don't want to remove parking spaces for EV if we can share it with the transit center. So I think that would be a great option, and we can leverage economies of scale across both projects. Thank you.
I think it would be nice to require the transit center to have very fast charging capabilities. Otherwise, you'll drive in, park your car, leave it there for hours or the entire day. So we have to look at what kind of charging stations there actually are in there, if it would be beneficial. So now we will have a comment from Commissioner Boyce.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So first of all, just let me, talking about the incentives for single family and townhomes, my understanding at the very beginning of this presentation is that's a moot point. We're not allowed to go above and beyond the building code. So I don't know how Belgium got away with it, but my understanding is that we can't do that. If I'm wrong, let me know. But to the chair's point, yes, in a single family house, let's say the cost is $975. Yes, a builder can absorb that when they're selling a $700,000 house. I don't think anybody has a problem with that regulation. I think where we might have a difference of opinions is when you start getting into the apartments, the affordable housing. And I do appreciate, Chris, you got Ms. Leeson's point that there are regulations. You know, you have to build a certain amount of affordable housing. However, if you look at the price chart, these are all per space. So a total cost range for new construction is $3,000 per space. Yet the requirements are in percentages. So if 5% of your parking lot needs to be EVSE ready and another 30% need to be EV ready at $1,500, yes, that's much more significant than a single family house. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think we need more literature as far as when it comes to the affordable housing. And again, I'm okay with having the percentages there for the multifamilies, but that I think is the point. Is it's one thing to do it in a single car garage, even a double car garage. It's quite another when we're talking about percentages of parking lots. So that's where I'd like to see more literature as far as getting feedback for these three questions. The TOD projects, like I said, I think I would need more information as far as how that works, being intertwined with affordable housing and whatnot. I think all of us would agree that having public spaces where you can charge your cars would be beneficial. The chair just mentioned something towards the end about having level 3 charging, and that price jumps exponentially. So again, it's one thing when we're talking about a single residential, which I thought was a moot point myself, I thought we couldn't jump the shark. If we can, it's not a big deal. But again, we're talking about percentages of parking spots, and that does start adding up very quickly. And I'm comfortable with the 30% and the 10%, but when we start talking about the 50%, we're talking big numbers. And that's why I'm very appreciative of Commissioner Carl's point about let's look at EV capable. And that's the one thing we don't have a price chart for. So that's my piece. Thank you.
So we have a comment from Miss Leeson.
I think that may have been from before. I do not have a comment. Thank you.
Okay, I have a comment from Commissioner Lewis.
Thank you, Commissioner Joy Lewis here. Megan, I think you did a really nice job summarizing up a lot of what we've been throwing at you. I did want to reiterate one of my points, and if no one else agrees with it, that's okay. But it's pretty common historically from where we sit that we look at a lot of broad things, and we ask other commissions and boards to give us opinions on nitty gritty, right? So whether that be the Development Commission, our previous Rivers and Streams, it's very common for us to say, hey, can you deep dive into this when you're looking at this? So when it comes back to us, we know what your recommendation is. And I'd really like to have a fine-tooth recommendation on a couple of these things from our environmental board. They are sitting in a position that we're not, and it's a great one for them to cut their teeth on, right? For them to be able to say, staff is giving us the recommendation. Let's really get the data on what other municipalities have done on incentive versus requirement. This is what other municipalities have gotten. This is what we're looking for. And this is kind of the strategy we want to go with, right? How do we want to jumpstart these protections? And I'd really like for them to get more concrete data than we've gotten here tonight. And I'd like them to be able to make a recommendation of saying, this is where we want to incentivize, this is where we want to require, so that we have a better idea than going to council on this issue of where do we use our carrot, where do we use our stick. So I just had missed that from when you were summarizing our comments. So I just wanted to include that real quick. Thank you.
Are there any more comments? Have we given staff enough direction?
This is Megan Curtis Murphy. Yes, this has been very, very helpful. And yeah, I look forward to talking about it with the environmental board next and providing more answers to some of these questions and the data, and then bringing it back to council on February 9th with more data as well.
Okay, so on January 28th, we will have a public hearing on this specific thing. I'm sure that we'll get more information, have more questions at that time. It's not an easy fix, and so I appreciate all the comments. I think the council appreciates the time and interest you have. Listening to the council session on Tuesday night, I was really excited, maybe that's not the right word, about what the council actually thinks of the ability of PPC to dig into the subject and provide some comments. When you look at the city council, they have 12 issues to look at one time. We are looking at one specifically, and so we have the time to do it. So I really appreciate some of the comments that they've been saying in the last, couple months, especially about the power of the PPC in helping to provide some guidance, not only from PPC, but from the community, so that the council can make the final decision on all this. So is there any comments for the good of the order before we talk about the upcoming schedule in more detail? Okay. Does the staff have any comments to make that we should to direct us to do anything more specific on these issues? No? Okay, so I guess we're gonna, is there a comment from Commissioner Lewis, or is that one that we've already, no? Okay. So with that, we're gonna end the discussion on this particular topic, and thank you. Awesome feedback. I'm gonna ask Kristen to talk about the upcoming schedule, the calendar of events.
Hi, this is Kristen Leeson, Senior Planner. I do want to note, I think Chair Provola may have just said that we have a public hearing on this on the 28th, but we do not. Not sure when that's going to happen. It was supposed to happen February 3rd, but that might be changing depending on what happens at the Environmental Board and the City Council study session on the 9th. So I'll keep you posted. The schedule has changed quite a few times this week. So I didn't want to put anything else out there because it keeps changing. I do want to say on the 28th, at our next meeting, we're having a public hearing on the comprehensive plan and zoning map amendment docket. We were also supposed to talk about signs. However, that's one of the things that's changed this week, and we're no longer talking about signs. So I will let you know now. The docket will probably take about 15 minutes. So I am going to request from you all, is there anything that you would like to talk about at that meeting where you feel like you don't have enough information? It's something that you've always wanted to talk about and we don't. I think we've asked you all about this, but let us know if there's something else that you want to talk about and we can put it on that agenda. Not the color of the sky or why the sky's blue. But
So just to be clear, will this be coming back to us before City Council makes a decision?
yes, there will be a public hearing here at PPC.
Okay, but you are going back to City Council before it comes back to us?
It is going back for a study session. Yes, on February 9th.
Okay, just to be clear that we will, the next time we talk about it, we will have feedback from the City Council. Okay, so that handles the calendar.
I have a quick question on our calendar. I know there's a lot of TBD, so I'm kind of curious if some of those TBDs are going to be stormwater, if they're going to be deep diving into Title 18, some of the things that in 2019 and in 2020 we were like, this is when we're going to get to it. If we're looking for a placeholder and if it's going to be hitting us this year. If you're looking for a filler for the 28th, what I would recommend right now is that we have a lot of wonderful new people joining our commission, and some of these things are big, right? So it might be nice to say, well, we're not presenting to you what we're proposing right now. Let's have a little bit of an education about what our comp plan looks like, right? So for some of us who have done it year after year, it's like riding a bike. It's actually fun, but for someone who hasn't looked at it, it can be a lot to chew. So if you're looking for a night to kind of say, let's have a little bit of education, let's talk about how these things work, let's talk about where we've been, a little history, it might be a good point, maybe not, but just a recommendation.
This is Kristen Leeson. That sounds good. We can do that. I will let you know, you asked about Title 18 and some other things. Stormwater, I don't think will be coming back this year. That's going to take a little bit longer. You will see a lot of Megan Curtis Murphy because they are also creating a climate change plan this year, and that is going to affect the comprehensive plan policies. So both of those things, both the climate change plan and the policy amendments, will be coming to City Council probably in June. We have Title 18, I think I just mentioned, will be coming. If Andrea Snyder would like to add to that, we're going to start some changes in 2021. Initially, we had these big plans of being done this year, but COVID. And so it's going to extend into 2022, but there will be some things that are done this year. And there's Andrea. Let her speak.
Thank you, Kristen. So for Title 18, we are about to hit publish on our RFQ for consultant firms that would be helping us with it. And so it's a little difficult for us to nail down topics and commission dates when we need to get them on board and to really use some of their expertise to also help hammer out a public engagement plan. But I think what we do anticipate are some joint meetings between the Environmental Board and Development Commission on some topics. Of course, every topic with Title 18 is going to come to this lucky, very thoughtful group. So there might be some things that are really more exclusively in PPC's wheelhouse, or that we will do other types of public engagement on before it comes to you for your consideration and discussion. So we need to kind of finalize those plans, and we need our consultant group on board to do that. What we had imagined is that we would do the bulk of the public engagement this year, with still going through the approval process, of which you are a major critical and necessary component the following year. So we do anticipate Title 18, which is the land use code. We do anticipate that work to absolutely spill over into 2022. So but we're trying to figure out exactly when those topics will come to you for discussion. I think a lot of it will be next year, but certainly you'll see some of it in 21 as well.
This is Kristen Leeson again, just adding on to the schedule and things that you all will be seeing this year. At some point, we will talk housing strategy. That may come up again. We may also talk, growth targets are being discussed this year. That process is just beginning, but because that is always a hot topic at PPC, we will bring that to you all as well for an education piece. And Central Issaquah monitoring report hasn't been done in a while, so that will come to you as well this year. Yeah. That's all I have for the schedule. I do have one quick report if you'd like to hear it.
Of course.
So on Tuesday night, we took the Old Town architectural standards for single family duplex to the city council meeting, and they liked it. So there were two comments at the end. One had to do with just concern with making sure that buildings are not big box buildings, that there's not a huge expanse of just flat wall, that there's some modulation in there. But I think the code or the standards covered that. And then another concern that perhaps the choice of just limiting the colors to 3 is maybe too prescriptive, but I think we've got that covered as well. So that's going to go back on February 1st to the City Council for action. Andrea, did you have anything else to add? Oh, sorry.
Nope. So following up on what the council said in regards to the Old Town standards, they were all in agreement, I think, to forward it on to council to get their final vote. I would like to reiterate the fact that 90% of everything that's in that new code was formulated at our January walk around, when we had 40 people, many of whom were members of the community. And these were their suggestions. We just formalized them and made them work and put them together. But I hope that once it does come to a vote at City Council, that they understand that, you know, a lot of people have worked on it and approved the suggestions in that new possible requirement for Old Town. So I'm hoping they do that. Do you have anything else to? If not, I'm going to open public comments and just ask Kristen if there is anybody signed. I don't see anybody, but is there anybody signed up to speak?
There is no one signed up to speak tonight.
Okay, so I didn't forget asking for that. So I'm right on schedule here. If there's nothing else If they're seeing no comments, nothing for the good of the order, I'm going to call the meeting to a close at 8:36. And wish you, oh, one other thing. Since this is going to the council study session on the 9th, I would hope that you all tune in and listen to the council's suggestions at that time so that either have us have more questions or settle some of the things that we do have now. So I would hope that you would all tune in for that on the 9th, and maybe Kristen can send out a reminder to everybody. So with that,
I can send you the links. Excuse me, I'm sorry. This is Kristen Leeson. I can send you the links to both the environmental board meeting once they've had that, because that will also be filmed, and to the city council meeting.
Thank you. I think the more we know about what's going on in the other commissions helps us and our questions that we ask in this particular commission. So even though I called the meeting to a close at 8:36, I'm going to change it to 8:37 to allow all of these little things that I've brought up here to be part of the meeting. So thank you all. So the meeting is adjourned, and I thank you for all your comments.
Outstanding meeting, everybody. Awesome. See you next time, y'all.
Thank you, staff.
Nice to meet you guys.
Everybody. Welcome.
You too.
Bye, everybody. Happy